everybody, thanks for coming. We are Team Judgment, and we're using construal level theory to help understand violent extremism. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about why violent extremism is so important. Then we're going to talk to you about the premise of our two-part study. We have a pilot study and a study proper. And then we're going to tell you a little bit about our team and give you some advice for your Gemstone careers and moving forward. So a violent extremist is someone who commits violence, aiming to achieve an ideologically motivated goal. As you can see from this chart, this has increased dramatically since 2004. In 2013, there were 10,000 violent extremist attacks. Law enforcement across the country voted in a 2013 poll and agreed that the sovereign citizen movement is the biggest threat facing the domestic United States. This is an anti-government movement, and it has about 300,000 members. For example, about 20 years ago, there was an Oklahoma City bombing. The bomber subscribed to these anti-government ideals, and that bombing killed 168 people and injured hundreds more. So how exactly do violent extremists think? Well, that really just depends on the type of membership. Some people are coerced into acting. These people are threatened or have something held against them like blackmail. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in people who voluntarily join these movements. These are people who voluntarily commit violence because they think it's a good idea. They want to help commit to these ideologies. Our goal is to use something called construal level theory to help better understand the decision of these voluntary extremists.
So construal level theory is a social psychology theory that says that the physical or the psychological distance, the psychological distance and the extent to which someone's thinking is either abstract or concrete. So the general idea is that an idea or object is more distant from an individual, is thought of as more abstract, whereas the closer an idea or object is to the individual is thought of as more concrete. So if you can look at the two pictures on the right, one of them says high level and one of them says low level. Looking at the high level construal is associated with abstract thinking, and the example that we use is a forest as to exemplify like a broad kind of example. Now, low-level construal is associated with concrete thinking, or more of a specific example. Now, to give someone a high-level construal manipulation, you ask them a question such as why. Versus if you want to give someone a low-level construal manipulation, you ask them a question such as how. Now, looking at this picture, if you looked at this picture and said they are having fun, father and son bonding, or enjoying each other's company, you would be looking at this in more of a high or abstract way. Versus if you were to look at this and say they're playing catch, or they both have red shirts, or this kid has on white shoes, you'd be looking at this in more of a concrete way. So those that describe the picture were exhibiting low construal, and those explaining the picture were exhibiting high construal. So this leads us to our research question, which is how do construal manipulations affect an individual's likelihood to engage in violent extremism? And looking at our hypothesis, we looked at previous literature where construal level theory was used, and it's been used many times in drug and addiction studies. Now, the literature showed that in low-level construal, people exhibited higher rates of impulsivity versus those who were subject to high-level construal exhibited less impulsive tendencies. Now, this is very important in that we're saying the exact opposite thing will happen when associated with violent extremism. Now, those in high level will be thinking more abstractly about the broader consequences, such as creating societal change or changing political goals, which we assume or we think that will increase the likelihood to engage in violent extremism. Versus if someone's in low construal, they'll be thinking more about the concrete consequences, such as I may die or I may get arrested, and that will create a lower likelihood to engage in violent extremism. And then our no construal or our control group, we predict will show no change.
So in order to test our hypothesis, we made a two-part study. The first part of our study is going to be the pilot study. And that's purpose is going to be to gather information for our study problem. So what we did at first was we looked into our literature view. And after looking through the literature, we discovered that our hypothesis and methods were kind of unique. No one else had incorporated construals into terrorism research before. And our literature review also helped us decide on the way we would test our hypothesis, which led to our pilot study. Since talking to terrorists would probably be dangerous and expensive, we decided to approach the problem in a different way. We decided to simulate these behaviors through vignettes, which are short, evocative stories designed to put the reader in a particular situation. And in order to qualify that approach, we again looked into the literature to see if any vignettes were there that we could use. However, we didn't find any materials that could be applied to this particular study, so we decided to create our own vignettes. And after a thorough writing and editing process, we created a list of 24 different vignettes, each of which is accompanied by a short survey, asking the reader to rank these vignettes on relatability, impactfulness, and the likelihood that that particular vignette would drive a participant to violence. Before we could start testing these vignettes, we had to get approval from the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. And that was a much longer process than any of us on the team had thought. Fortunately, earlier this semester, we were approved by our IRB, and we started data collection. And now the purpose of our pilot study is to inform the choices we make while designing our study properly. We want to narrow our list of 24 vignettes down into a list of about 10 or so, the most impactful and relatable of those vignettes. And in order to simulate the conditions that we would have in our pilot study, in our main study, we developed a pre-screening survey. And this pre-screening survey limited the list of participants to people who were between the ages of 18 through 24, who had graduated high school and lived in the USA. And we did this in order to best simulate the participant pool that we were expecting in our study proper, which we will be administering to University of Maryland students. After a participant successfully completes this pre-screening survey, they'll be given 4 different vignettes to read, each of which followed by another survey asking the participants about their opinions on those vignettes. Now, this whole pilot study process is hosted on Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is an online tool researchers can use to quickly and effectively connect with people who want to participate in research. Since the entire process is online and it's fairly well known, it really helps us to streamline the data collection process and makes it relatively pain-free. However, we did encounter a couple of problems with Amazon Mechanical Turk. The first of which was self-imposed. Since we have this pre-screening survey, we did get a lot of data very quickly. However, only about 15% of that data was usable. That is to say, only about 15% of participants fulfilled all 3 of those pre-screening conditions. Now, the second problem is a fund availability problem, and it's a pretty recent problem, and it's been very frustrating. Amazon Mechanical Turk actually revamped their entire payment process, and although we do have the funds to pay the people who want to take our study, we don't have a method of actually putting those funds into our account. So hopefully we've discovered a workaround to this, and we're hoping to start data collection again at the end of the week. And once we finish this data collection, we'll analyze the data and use it in our study proper.
So the purpose of the study proper is to actually answer the question that we proposed earlier, which is our research question. We're going to be using the SONA research system, which is a platform offered by University of Maryland, which allows researchers to offer studies to students who want to take them for credit. So the purpose of this is to actually embed our construals into the vignettes, and this is a novel idea. What we're actually trying to do is attempt to modify a participant's thoughts as they're reading the vignette, to sort of offer a direction as they're reading. So each participant is going to be given 2 vignettes, and we're going to pick the vignettes based on their relatability to the specific participant. And the way we're going to do this is through an algorithm that we're developing, that we can selectively choose those vignettes that will elicit the most evocative response from particular people. Because not everyone is going to be emotional about different topics, right? Each vignette is going to be broken up into 5 short subsections, and each subsection is followed by a fill-in-the-blank question. So for example, if a participant is a control participant, there's not going to be a question given to them. But if they're a low control participant, we're going to ask them a how question. As mentioned before, how questions tend to ask people about details. People intend to think more of descriptions, whereas a high construal or a why question will force a participant to think more abstractly or about future or reasons. So after these vignettes, after they've read all of the vignettes and answered the fill-in-the-blank questions, we're going to be offering our actual experimental questionnaire, which asks participants whether or not they would be likely to engage in different kinds of violent extremist behaviors. The purpose of this slide is not for you guys to read because it's a lot of text, but this is just a snapshot of what a vignette will look like for a participant. You're going to have some text, followed by a question, followed by more text, and so on and so forth, until we've done about 5 subsections. The purpose of this is to show you guys how the construal is embedded into the story. So a participant will read, and then they'll look at a question, and they'll follow it with an answer. And the questions also tend to become more specific until the very end, so really directing a participant's thoughts. So where are we right now? We're in the orange section, junior colloquia, obviously. We're actually collecting our data right now for the pilot study, which is extremely essential for the study proper, because without that data, we won't be able to pick the vignettes that we think are going to actually make a difference. In spring 2015, at the start of the semester, we want to do our study proper, and hopefully by the end of the semester, we will have all of our data collected, and we'll be able to create a fantastic presentation for undergrad research day. And then in fall 2015 and afterwards, we're focusing on our thesis.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our team challenges so far. Now, one of our biggest challenges was the concept of our project changing. Now, our project began as a bystander effect project when it was initially proposed, which is kind of different from what we proposed to you today. Now, one of those things that it started off, but don't be afraid of change. Allow your project to grow into what your team wants it to and what it will become. Now, another thing is we start off with poor communication habits, and as in a group project, you can imagine it's kind of a problem. Now, because of those poor communication habits, we had no idea what other members of our team were doing sometimes. And finding a solution for this was tedious, so make sure you start off with good communication habits so you don't have to go through this process. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit of highlights of our team or our team successes. So our project actually has no psychology majors, even though our project is very, very psych-based. Now, one of the reasons for that is don't be afraid to branch out outside of your major and be adventurous. If you find a project that you think is interesting, make sure you go for it, whether it's within your major or not. Another thing we do is called the question of the day, and so we do it at the beginning of every meeting. And some questions, a question could be like, if your life was made into a movie, who would play you and why? It started off as an icebreaker, but it kind of became a tradition as we've been proceeding with our project. And we also, another thing we did get grant funding, which we were lucky to get, and it's kind of a nice process to learn how to write grants, and something that you should definitely try to do. And we broke our team into several sub-teams: the IRB submission team, the paper writing team, and the study administration team, and the financial team. And this really helps us, designate roles and, understand who's doing what and be accountable for our own work. Now, this is our advice, and although I've been telling you some things previously in the previous slides, this is kind of the 3 things we really want to emphasize. One is have a plan, and that doesn't mean have a plan for your entire project, but set short and long-term goals and have a plan to reach them. And designate roles to avoid diffusion of responsibility. And by diffusion of responsibility, I mean people assuming someone else is going to do a part that was assigned. And one of the things that helps with that is designated roles, like we did. And be friends. So you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, whether you like it or not. And don't be worried to express your feelings to your team, because it is important at the end of the day. And make sure you guys are friends, but don't let that inhibit your process and your productivity. So we have a couple acknowledgements. Our mentor, Dr. Yee, CAPER research assistants, Kayla Thormolen and Allison Stuppy, our librarians, Judith Markowitz and Eric Lindquist, and the Start Terrorism Research Center for all their help, the Dean's Research Initiative Grant, and Gemstone. So we'd like to open up for questions. Yeah, you in the back?
I had a question about your study proper, actually.
Okay.
So that after today, we're going to ask the questions for the low or high rule. What exactly are you going to collect data-wise
Okay, so the question was how would we collect data from the construal questions and how we would use that towards our study proper?
Yeah, how do you use that to answer your actual question?
All right, so I'll answer that question. So the construal manipulation isn't actually something that we collect. It's kind of a process that we go through to make sure that someone's either thinking in a high or low level construal. So the how question, as you ask it, becomes more and more specific, versus the why, it becomes more and more broad. So now what happens is that just is supposed to put you in a mindset, and that's from previous literature. That's not actually what we're collecting. We have a separate questionnaire that they fill out afterwards, which is where our data is going to be coming from. Jesse.
I was wondering, do you have a way to control for the fact that maybe naturally some people are more high or low construal thinkers? And if so, how are you countering that?
Okay, so the question was, do we have something to control for the baseline construal of most people?
So we actually don't have something to control that. It's kind of like a timeline in a sense that an individual kind of sits on that timeline. And with the control manipulations, we're attempting to push them towards one end of that spectrum. So through randomness and people having different levels of control coming into the study, we believe that it'll be statistically insignificant to have people with different levels of controls just because we will have a significant number of participants run for each vignette. Does that make sense?
Thanks. Tim?
Yeah, just right now, I think I'm just gonna do research. Who are you gonna expect to benefit from what you guys are getting at? I mean,
Okay, so the question was about the conclusion of our research and who is going to benefit from that research?
So basically, there's a lot of government organizations that are highly interested in this research, and also people like the Stark Terrorism Center. A lot of government organizations are working on rehabilitation programs, which use things like, similar to construal manipulations and other psychological manipulations, working to change people's mindset and change how they think about violent extremism. Does that make sense?
Cool, yeah, in the back right there, second row. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on your vignette creation process? So how did you write and edit your vignettes to make sure that there was no bias? Did you use certain words or phrases?
Okay, so the question's about our process in writing the vignettes.
So Christian really wasn't exaggerating when he said it was a long and gruesome process. You can imagine how long it would take to write 24 vignettes. So the way that we did that is we actually kind of used our own resources. We all have different political views, religious views, kind of a mini diversity, I would say, just on our team. So all of us wrote vignettes to contribute to the pilot study, but then when it came down to it, we just made them into a similar format so that each of them was viable for the pilot study. So for example, we have vignettes ranging from controversial topics such as gun rights in the United States, all the way to religious persecution, to topics such as pro-life, pro-choice, such as that. So we have individuals who care about both sides writing about them. So in that sense, we kind of get the full spectrum.
Okay, yeah,
Do you think honesty would be an issue with something like this? Like if someone is answering the questions?
okay, yeah, so the question was about honesty in the study proper or the pilot study?
In the study.
And the study proper.
So that was definitely a concern. One thing is we're actually administering the study online. So we actually had a discussion with our team about how participants would take the study if they were like in their own dorm rooms or own apartments, sort of isolated from other disturbances and things like that. Granted, if they did take this study in person, we'd also control for things like that. But we do believe, based on our mentors' past experiences with studies such as using, asking questions and things like that, that students or participants who are sort of more comfortable or in the confines of their own home may tend to answer more honestly than they would if they were known that they were being watched by the supervisors or researchers. So we think that we may get even better results from doing an online study in terms of controlling for dishonesty versus honesty.
So last question. Yeah, in the back.
Going back to what you said earlier, you said that they'd be taking a questionnaire after they get through the vignettes. What kind of questions are on this questionnaire, and how are they relating back to domestic terrorism? Because otherwise it just sounds like you're testing if people are high or low, which has been done.
Right, so We are collecting their answers to the high and low control questions, but that's not what we're testing. We're not testing any of that. The questionnaire that we are going to use has actually been adopted from domestic violence questionnaires and also violence in children relating to video games and violent television shows. This has been used in the past to test for violent extremist tendencies and tendencies to likelihood to engage in violence. And so we've kind of adopted it from that, taken looks at different kinds of studies, and incorporated that into our own. So that's the data that we are going to be testing. We won't be testing whether or not, what the level of construal is in the person. We're asking those questions, we're asking them to record them to make sure that, their answers correspond to a high or low, but we're not going to be testing any of that data.
Just to elaborate, the questions that they answer, the questions that we ask are related to their likelihood to engage in violence, and they're actually going to rank them themselves, and we're going to quantify that data. So it is quantifiable because they rank it using a certain scale that we have, which is numerical, and so with that we'll be able to do statistical analysis of that as well. So it is a quantitative study. Yeah. Wait, is that it? I'm sorry. You can ask us later if you want.
Thank you, good job.